I'm John Fensterwald, a staff writer at EdSource, and welcome to Distance Learning 2.0, Transforming Education in a Post-Pandemic World, with Anaheim Union High School District Superintendent Michael Matsuda and Assistant Superintendent Jaron Freed. This is the second day of a two-day webinar about how two California districts successfully navigated distance learning during school closures and are now deep into the planning phase of the next iteration. Pajaro Valley Unified and Anaheim Union are certainly different in some respects. One is in Watsonville, the heart of agriculture of coastal Santa Cruz County. The other is next to Disneyland. What they have in common, though, are effective communication with parents and the community and a culture of collaboration with teachers and staff that enabled both districts to move decisively and collectively into distance learning. Most significantly, their approach to distance learning has been true to their core values, a commitment to equity and students' emotional well-being in the case of Pajaro Valley, and, as you will soon hear, a commitment to preparing all students for college and 21st century careers and the learning skills and values needed to achieve them, what Anaheim Union calls the 5 C's. The 5 C's have guided their thinking for the next phase. Michael Matsuda is a big picture superintendent who Education Week named as one of 12 leaders to learn from. He became superintendent in 2014 after 2 decades as a teacher and innovative administrator. He also co-chaired P21 California, a statewide coalition supporting 21st century content and skills. Jaron Freed, who is assistant superintendent for education services, also served as Assistant Superintendent of Human Resources, Principal, Assistant Principal, and Teacher. Now with that build up, Mike and Jaron, I turn the webinar over to you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, John, and thank you to all of EdSource for hosting this webinar, and thanks to all of our participants up and down the state of California. As we speak, many of us are dealing with student demonstrations out in the community. As educators, as parents, we are very worried about our students. And in fact, yesterday I broke my 2.5-month hibernation to go out to ensure that our students were safe. And we had over 2,000 students without any violence. And in fact, today, this morning too, another demonstration occurred at City Hall. Of course, we're the home of the Disney Resort, so a lot of attention here. I think it says a lot about our kids across the state that they do have a lot of anger, and it's very important that we allow a space for them to vent. We know as educators that democracy is under threat more than ever. And I want to put a plug in for democracy schools. I know that my colleague Jaron Freed is going to be talking about it, but if you are so inclined as a public educator, I really think you should check out the Democracy School program at Los Angeles County Office of Education. Go to their website, it's all right there. It's really, we need to double down on civic engagement and democracy. So there are 4 outcomes of today's webinar. One is about being nimble in this radically changed world. And I think it's just, as individuals, leaders, you need to do a self-reflection. Where am I on this? How nimble am I? And also, how nimble is my organization in pivoting? As Jerry Brown used to say, there's sometimes you have to canoe left, sometimes you have to canoe right, but you're always going forward. The worst thing is for us to freeze in fear. Number 2 is learn how this is truly a teachable moment. COVID-19 is right now, and it's not going away for a while. And of course, COVID-19 has exposed a lot of the inequities that we're seeing the kids demonstrate about. Number 3, the big third takeaway is to learn what skills teachers and administrators need, and how can you up your game in distance learning. And of course, the final one is to learn about AUHSD's plan for hybrid learning and also launching 100% distance learning school. That really is about teacher leadership and student innovation. Okay, next one. So let's, before we get into this, I do think we need to figure out what is the end in mind, right? We've been focused too long on data and information. And again, COVID-19 has exposed this problem, I think, in education. We need to move into the upper realms of knowledge and wisdom. Any of us can take out our phones and find so much information and data, but how do you make sense of it? How do you find patterns? How do you apply that data and information to really get to the upper realms of the pyramid of wisdom? And I think that as educators, this is what we came into the profession for, but it's been 20 years of a focus on the lower levels. And I think it's about time we really press the reset button and challenge ourselves to, in terms of looking at our own drivers. Next, thank you. Another way to look at this is that we are drowning in information while starving for wisdom. I think all of you would agree that that is a big problem right now. There's too much information and our kids don't know how to make sense of it. They don't know how to see the patterns. As my good friend and colleague, Kelly Gallagher, who's a nationally acclaimed literacy expert and recently retired from our district, he puts it this way, that we've prepared students for a multiple choice rather than an essay world. Think about that. And I think that's true with us as leaders. Many of us are acting and reacting to this multiple choice world, waiting to be told by whomever in terms of where we need to go. We need to really draw upon the intellectual capital within each of our school districts, namely our teachers. So when, as John said, prior to becoming superintendent, I did spend a lot of time as a teacher leader and working in professional development. And back in the day, we used to kind of, there's a lot of impressive speakers out there, very motivational. And they would usually end their speech by looking at all the teachers and say, the answer is in the room. And then we go back and know that we were going back to the pacing guides and the interim assessments. And I just felt that that was a big problem because, yes, if you look at the amount of teachers that we have in the state of California, something like 300,000 teachers, and the amount of admins, which is just a small percentage of that. In fact, our district has 80 administrators and 1,200 teachers. We need to be serious about the answer being in the room. And I think that one of what we're trying to do is unleash the creative ability, the innovation of our teachers, because unless we're able to do that, we're not gonna be able to unleash the creative abilities of our kids. And I think that's what's going to, we need to get to that place where kids can innovate their way into other jobs, into other careers, and invent new industries that have not been invented. It's really up to our students and our teachers. So there are four big things that we've talked about in our district about the nimble leadership. Nimble culture, to be able to play three-dimensional chess, to model the 5 C's and learn how to catch the waves, to be proactive rather than reactive. And I think the best way to do this is tell the story through pictures. Let's take the first one. So part of being a nimble leader is really being able to operate in ambiguity and operate knowing that you don't have all the information. Back to Jerry Brown, you've got to be willing to move forward at some point. Michael Fullen talks about the importance of decisional capital. We're not talking about making decisions that are reckless. We're talking about making informed decisions based on the information you know, but also understanding what you don't know. And that has been the world of COVID-19. As you guys know, every day it seems like something is changing. The governor's saying this, the president's saying that, and we're having to navigate this with our respective counties, Office of Education, and we're forced to really be nimble in order to survive this. You know, there's a lot of, I meet with a number of superintendents. I'm on the CSBA advisory group with superintendents, and you know, I think that more than ever, we've got to bring this nimble culture into not just ourselves as leaders, but down into the site and teacher level, including the classified level as well. Let's go to the next one. I love this picture. I used to love the original Star Trek and was infatuated with that three-dimensional chessboard. Again, Michael Fullen, a lot of these leaders have influenced my thinking, but he talks about systems, and there's another business guru, Russell Akoff, who talks about dynamic systemness. And I really think that if you look at what we are and what we do in education as a chessboard, the first level being our school site, whether you have systemness at your school site, this is another sort of come to Jesus. Is the site siloed, or is there sort of inclusive decisional capital that's happening at my site? And each of these levels is based on trust and vulnerability. You know, I really get tired of hearing people just sort of, kind of outdo each other at some of these meetings and convenings, and then it's not really authentic. You know, if we're going to deal with these problems, we have to be honest about what's working and what's not working and where the gaps are, so we can really address the gaps rather than just pretending that there are no gaps and everything's fine. So that's that first level, is that really the site systemness and the communication with all the stakeholders. And the communication at all levels is not vertical, it's not top down, it's horizontal, and it's back and forth. So the second level of the chessboard is really the systemness of the district office. Oftentimes, the district office is perceived as the enemy of the sites, right? And especially now, because Jaron's going to be talking about opening schools, and if you don't have cohesion between the district office and the sites, it's going to be a big cluster. And you've got to do, right now, we've got a few months, you've got to do that gut check. Is there systemness at the district level? And not only at the district level, between departments. Like, one thing that we found was that our departments were not cohesive, right? So it's like, where's the tail wagging the dog? And that takes a lot of vulnerability for people to really break down those communication barriers. So generally, when you go to admin credential school, it stops, your education and your training stops at that first and second level, talking about the school site and then talking about your relationship with the district office. Oftentimes you don't get the third level, which is really an important level, especially now. Those are your relationships with your community partners, including higher ed partners, community college, CSU, UC, private schools, also the business partners as well, business and nonprofits and religious institutions. More than ever, we need those. In fact, many of the food banks are being supplemented by our business partners, are the religious institutions. So really, really important. Now, prior to COVID-19, we had these three levels. And that third level, we had something like, we have 70 business corporate partners. And I had the luxury of sitting down with many of the CEOs in Orange County. And they would tell me that you guys are the only district that's really speaking our language, the language of customer service and emotional intelligence, which we call the 5 Cs. So they were not concerned about a test score, an SAT, or any of that. They were concerned about whether kids can communicate, collaborate, think on their feet. And one of the most important ones is having compassion and sort of an understanding of the social emotional need of all young people. What I think American businesses are having to deal with right now prior to COVID-19 is retraining. They were hiring from the top UCs and private schools. And paying a lot of money, but then having to retrain because they did not, the graduates did not have the training in this customer service and emotional intelligence. So once they found out that we were actually using the 5 Cs as a driver, that was a big draw. And I think that's really vital as we move forward now, because so many businesses and industries are being swept away by this pandemic. They were already in trouble. But, and so you think about the future for our kids, already high unemployment, right? Already expensive tuition, and already jobs, the few jobs there are were without benefits. Well, that of course has been exacerbated by COVID-19. So all the more reason why we need to have some cohesion. And I was very disappointed, by the way, in the governor's budget, because they cut out the career tech monies. And I think that's just such an important piece right now, to have time and experiences, to build experiences with business and nonprofit leaders. And the last one, of course, is in terms of leadership, is to try to see above the horizon what's coming next. And so we can catch that wave. We see in business, the Blockbusters, the Sears, and the Kodaks who have gone by the wayside, companies that had monopolies. K-12 has a monopoly on kids. And I think that if we're not careful, we can be swept away, as we saw public schools swept away in New Orleans after Katrina. I really think that this is a pivotal moment for public schools, for democracy, and for this country, as I'm sure you would agree. So we as leaders have got to be able to have the courage to see beyond and be willing to make some tough decisions moving forward. And we're going to talk more about what that looks like, but I wanted to lay those things down for you prior to going into the next section. So thank you.
Jaron, you want to take the next section? Or?
Yeah, did you have a few questions you wanted to ask us first before we transition to the section?
Well, yeah, I just want to, Michael, how did, what you talked about was really interesting, but how did it translate into how you approach distance learning, what we have now in the district? In other words, how did the nimbleness, how did the system-wide approach, and can you point to decisions you made that reflect this approach that you took?
I think it's based on relationships, individual relationships. And as I talked about that three-dimensional chess, to ensure that we had authentic relationships with principals, with district people, with our unions, with our parent groups, and that there is high levels of trust. And that trust is based on being vulnerable in terms of what's working and what's not working. And to be honest about that and transparent. Otherwise, I think one of the big problems right now with COVID-19, people are losing trust in these numbers of testing and people dying and all of those things, because, and once they lose trust, once they think those numbers are phony, then you're losing trust in the whole system. And I think that back to our nimbleness, we decided we needed to get ahead of this. And 5 weeks ago, we developed a task force with 45 of our stakeholders, looking at all the different scenarios. Rather than waiting to be told, we said, look, we need to get ahead of this. And if the governor says it's going to be this way, we're going to be ready. But if not, we're going to be ready too, right? So we looked at different scenarios, and we had, now we're really close to, in fact, we are recommending a hybrid model. And Jaron's going to be talking about that later.
I'm just curious how you reached the expectations that were district-wide, expectations for student performance, and also expectations for teachers.
So I can answer this one, John. So we have been fortunate that we have very strong relationships with our union and leadership and associations. And before COVID-19, those relationships were strong, and we already had strong systems and structures in place that allowed us to do that work with the same level of high expectations moving forward. So on March 13th, when our world was turned upside down and we were now forced into this distant learning process, because those systems were already in place, and as Mike said, the relationships were there, became very smooth in the way that we were able to translate or transition. We already have a very strong family and community engagement program in our district. We have family and community engagement specialists at all of our sites who do just a masterful job of connecting our families to our schools and providing supports and resources to them. Again, we have strong relations with our unions where we were regular and probably over communicating with our staff and our parents and our students in terms of our expectations. what distance learning looks like, how it's going to be done. As we were building the schedule that we used, the union leadership was a part of that process, so they were giving input along the way. So a lot of those things made it very easy. So it wasn't just sprung on them. They were a part of the thought process as we were developing this. So there was buy-in from the get-go. And I think a lot of our staff really appreciated being kind of at the table and being shared a lot of this information and how we're approaching things from the onset. And as I'll talk about in a little bit later, we already had a lot of drivers in our district that really indicated and directed the work that we ended up doing. So it made the transition, again, even easier for us with this shift.
Why don't you go ahead, and then we'll come back with a couple more questions about how you.
I'm going to just.
Mike, begin this piece.
This is Amanda Gorman. She is the Youth Poet Laureate. And again, I think if we just take a pause and listen to what young people are saying about the world around them. I'm going to read just a short stanza about this teachable moment. And this is what she says. In this chaos, we will discover clarity. In suffering, we must find solidarity. For it is our grief that gives us our gratitude, shows us how to find hope. If we ever lose it, shall ensure this ache was injured in vain. Do not ignore the pain. Give it purpose. Use it. It's a beautiful poem, and I wanted to use that to segue into our teachable moment.
Thank you, Mike. So if you look at the next slide, I want to give just a brief context to our drivers in our district. And again, this is what allowed us to move so quickly with the transition to the COVID-19 and distance learning. So if the one thing that we wrestled with prior to COVID-19 is we were constantly asking ourselves as a district and our stakeholders, how are we preparing students for college, career, and life success? You know, what is the world of work going to demand of our students? And as we were thinking about these questions, this became our driving factor in terms of how we designed and developed our approach really to teaching and learning. And these priorities that I'm going to talk about in a moment really became our roadmap that positioned us so beautifully when we were asked to shift to distance learning so quickly. If you look at on the right side, you'll see the California Democracy School, and Mike alluded to this earlier. Through the LA County Office of Education, we have over 300 teachers trained and now 15 schools in our district that are California Democracy Schools. And essentially, this means that our teachers have been trained to bring in local, national, even international issues that our kids care about without us as the adults imposing our views or perspectives on the students, but giving them the skills that it takes to navigate through those issues, to do their own research and inquiry around those issues, to come up maybe with a position on that issue, backed by evidence that they've collected, and then most importantly, to do something with that information. How do you make it better? How do you work towards resolution? How do you inform others about the issue? So this has already been going on in our district well before the COVID-19. And then when you look on the left side and you think about our Anaheim Union Educational Pledge, like many districts throughout the state, we have a promise program. We call it the Anaheim Union Pledge. This is an articulated agreement and comprehensive plan that we have in partnership with our higher ed partners, UC Irvine, Cal State Fullerton, Cypress, and Fullerton College, along with the city of Anaheim. And really what's central to the framework of this pledge and this collaboration are what you see in the center, and that's the 5 C's. This is our commitment to our partners and to our students, that we're going to ensure that our students every day, every period, get opportunities to practice and be taught and how to integrate with their traditional content these skill sets. We have seen tremendous data that, for example, at UC Irvine, we saw a 43% rise in the admittance to our students at UC Irvine. And we really believe, and the university has said, that it's because of our focus on these skill sets. For us, it's not just about getting kids into college, it's about getting them through. And that's where the 5 C's really make an impact and have become our drivers. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So this really became the teachable moment for us. And as we're thinking about the COVID-19 and this Capstone project, one of the things that was also significantly important to us moving forward was the mental health of our students and our staff. Not only did many of our students prior to COVID-19 already faced with trauma and challenging barriers and obstacles in their lives, but even our staff, right? Many of them are parents themselves and have now their own kids going through distance learning. How can we create a system that is not only going to protect our students and their well-being, but also be mindful of our staff and what we're asking them to do during this transition? So given the work that we've done with our project-based learning, the work that we've done with our 5 C's, civic engagement is really a part of our DNA. This COVID-19 capstone really made sense for us. it seemed like a logical place for us to take the curriculum. And one of the things we asked our teachers is, and our students is, how is the coronavirus affecting your life? And so through this COVID-19 project, this is what our students and our staff engaged in. And like what we said, this wasn't something that we imposed on our students or our staff. It was something that we put out there. Is we were giving them permission essentially to pivot from the traditional curriculum to really use this as their curriculum. You know, for many of our students, this is their JFK moment. This is their 9/11, right? This is something they're going to remember for the rest of their lives. They're going to remember forever when schools were shut down, how people treated them. They saw family members lose their jobs. So it was really important for us to be mindful about how we're approaching teaching and learning during this time. And all the while connecting it to their learning and to the standards that we're expected to bring to our students. So that fifth C, that compassion piece, really rang true for us in how we created this project. And again, what I love about the COVID-19, that I'm going to give you some examples in a moment, is that it spanned across all content areas and all grade levels. So again, as a secondary district, grades 7 through 12, we had science teachers, social science teachers, English teachers, elective teachers, all participating in this COVID-19 project. Again, without us even imposing or mandating it. They were choosing to do it because we have done so much work with our students and our staff prior, it became a natural fit for us as a district. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So I want to give you an example of what one of these projects might have looked like. So like many school districts, we also had the choral program, sing songs of hope and inspiration that were part of a Zoom meeting. So we did that stuff as well. But what was deeper about the COVID-19 Capstone project is that we had reflective and writing aspects built in. We were asking our students to look at issues around social justice and equity as they were going through and reflecting on their own experiences as to how the COVID-19 was impacting them, their families, and their own lives. And I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir when I say this, but the COVID-19 really did heighten so many of the inequities that so many of our students and our community stakeholders were now facing. So here's an example where in one of our classes, and I think a couple teachers actually combined on this project, they took a project where students were making connections with the COVID-19 and its relationship to minority populations. More specifically, they were looking at counties in California with high and low numbers of minority populations and how these different groups were being affected via the infection and via unemployment. So they were looking at this specifically and making connections and inferences. And then again, through the civic ed, we're looking at ways that they can improve outcomes for groups that are often marginalized. So again, connecting it to the drivers we had prior, but giving kids a really rich and meaningful experience to make sense of what they were experiencing in class. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So here's another example of an art class where they were asked to reflect upon their experiences and express those emotions and those thoughts through the medium of art, through sketchbooks, through poetry, through portraits as an example. And you can see on the slide, nature walks. Our kids were really taking to heart what they were experiencing and connecting it to their content, in this case, an art class. And if you go to our district website and our AUHSD YouTube channel, you can actually see, and it's about an hour long, a showcase of student projects that we did throughout the district. And you'll see content areas that span the cross of the different content areas where kids were demonstrating their mastery of the 5 C's, their connections to the content. Just really, really impressive work that our students did throughout our district. And you'll also note, and one of the things that I know as the assistant superintendent of ed services that I'm also incredibly proud of, and our teachers really are to be given the credit. They just did remarkable work, and of course the support of our site administrators, is it didn't compromise the integrity of teaching and learning. Right? It didn't compromise the student access to standards. That all the while they were getting these experiences, we were also being mindful of their mental health. So something I think we're just incredibly proud of as a district. And we saw the rigor of our students in terms of what they were doing, but doing it in such a mindful and compassionate way, something that we're incredibly proud of. You can go to the next slide. John, I don't know if you want to ask a couple questions now as we transition. Oh, you're on mute.
Thank you. How many of your seniors took advantage of the Capstone project? And I'm wondering whether there are any presentations to the community or to parents or the like.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, the Capstone Showcase, that was our culminating Capstone event where these showcase projects were out for the community to see. It was on our YouTube channel. It went out as a designated start time. So via the internet, they were able to see the different projects that our students did. And this, again, was more than just our seniors. This was all grade levels, but we had thousands and thousands of students participate because all of our schools were participating. All of our students across the different grade levels were participating. And again, the different content.
But John, also our schools have a senior capstone, right? So, and even the junior highs have capstones now. So it's a very much of a project-based, evidence-based portfolio over 6 years. One of the things that we're pushing is TED Talks in our English classes and history classes as well. So you can imagine the level of sophistication over 6 years that's coming out of our district.
And could you, we have a number of people who would like to know more about your teaching plans under distance learning. Maybe you could talk about what it's been like for the past several months, and then how it might, you're going to get into the future and a hybrid, how it might change. But how did you, how did it work? How did teachers collaborate? Did they you use synchronous or asynchronous presentation?
So if I can go into this section here, because I think this will address what I think how we've been successful here. And again, this is hard stuff, as you guys, as the audience knows. So I would, to everybody, you need to look at the national standards for online learning. We've been very fortunate because we've had e-learning for almost 9 years, and the person who really was behind it, she's retired, but she was twice the National Online Teacher of the Year, Renee Sitlow, and very ahead of her time, and developing a e-learning program in our district where about 1,500 kids, high school kids, participate. So we had a number of teachers trained on these standards. And so we had a very high bar. I'm not saying that every teacher does this. In fact, that's the big challenge right now. But I think that we need to direct educate our audience to these national online standards. So we can go to the next one. And we've aligned it with, of course, the CSTP, which most districts use as an evaluation tool. And I want to make it clear that we approach evaluation as support. It's not a gotcha thing. We're trying to, like I said, I was professional development before, and I really, we studied adult learning theory and how to frame things. Things need to be framed in such a way that the adults, the teachers, really feel respected and they feel supported, and they want to grow. It's that whole growth mindset. So we've done a crosswalk. We've aligned it, CSTP, with the National Online Teaching Standards. So we go to the next one. So there are 3 big takeaways, because of course, like the CSTP, it's dense. There's a lot of stuff in there. But from the National Online Standards, there are 3 takeaways we have. One is lesson design, and meaning a common layout and many intentional opportunities for interaction. This is a huge piece in online learning. And the second one is about assessment. And we're not talking about multiple choice assessment. We're talking about more of these projects and units, applied learning, where again, there are intentional places where there's a lot of checking for understanding and teacher presence. They talk about teacher presence in the online world, where there's less, post and go, right? I'm sure you guys have heard of that, where people are just posting and not coming back, right? And it's, I don't blame the teachers, because we have amazing people. I blame the system where, the teachers were afraid to do their own thing for almost 20 years, right? There's like pacing guides, follow the textbooks, interim assessments. We don't use any of that in our district. 6 years. We don't have district benchmarks in our district. And yet our test scores are rising every year, and despite what some people might predict, what our demographics would predict. So I think that we have a model which I think is teacher-centered, and it's very powerful. The third one is, of course, the reflective piece, and CSTP is like standard 6, but it's about professional development and continuous improvement. So we can go to the next one. So this is like back to the having this common sort of template. And I want to make sure that the audience understands that a common template is not a one-size-fits-all. When I was teaching, you know, my room didn't look that bad on the left, but it was pretty, you know, it wasn't totally neat like on the right. But a kid in my class, right, if they wanted to know where the hall pass was, they would just lean over to his buddy and say, where's the hall pass? Or where's the learning target today, right? And I think what we're finding is that we need to have a systematic way of setting up our, quote, rooms virtually. And so you're going to find that there's a lot of training in how to use the learning management system and how students and parents can navigate what this classroom looks like. And I think that's really important, that everybody sort of has common language in terms of where things are. So we don't waste a lot of time, because as you know, kids get frustrated, just like adults get frustrated, they give up. And if they're looking around for stuff, it might very well be there, but we're wasting a lot of time. So we go to the next one. And only until we get there can we unleash the innovative and talent of our teachers. And so I wanted to make that really clear, is that we're not talking about a one size fits all. We're talking about this common template so we can unleash those amazing projects and amazing hands-on types of things that teachers create so students can create. Okay, next one. The other piece too, we talked about this assessment. Assessment is connected to checking for understanding. If you're working on projects, there should be intentional places where you need to check in. And that's multiple times, right, during the course of a week. So that teacher presence is very visible and it's intentional. And I think that, again, in the online world, they talk about teacher presence between teacher and student, but also student to student. And that's where the learning management system is really important. Teachers need to understand how to use the bells and whistles, because if they don't, then they're missing a golden opportunity. Next one. And then the last piece is about this reflective continuous improvement. Teachers have got to have places where they can share what they've done, what they've created. They can share student work, and always be thinking about, how am I going to improve that? Next one, please. So prior to COVID-19, our district had really, we learned from other districts. You know, this is what I really think we need to do, is find shared places virtually where districts and teachers can talk to each other and learn from each other. So we got this idea from Imperial County, the teacher learning walks. This is not the administrative rounds, where this is not evaluation. The teachers were in other teachers' classrooms and not pointing fingers at their fellow teacher, but thinking about how they were going to improve. And we did it based around the 5 C's. And so what we're doing now is creating virtual teacher learning walks for those teachers that might need support, and they can learn from their fellow teachers on, you know, there's amazing teachers out there doing high-level work, and that's what we want to do. It's not evaluative, it's about professional development, teachers helping teachers in a safe place, but learning to implement these high-level standards. That's my piece, John.
Yeah.
So John, you asked one question that I want to make sure to answer. I know Mike spoke beautifully to the professional learning plan and how we're building capacity in our teachers, but with the schedule. So the schedule that we put together in the spring for our distance learning, and there's a whole nother process we put in place for the fall. You asked about professional learning. So it built into our schedule, not only do we have synchronous and asynchronous opportunities for our students with office hours, but we also built the embedded structures we already had in place prior to COVID-19. So for example, in our district, we have late starts where every week our teachers have an opportunity to collaborate with one another. We built that into our schedule. Every Wednesday at 10 in the morning, content level departments at each site got together and they got to collaborate. And one of the things that we found from our site administrators and from teachers, that not that collaboration was not good prior, but it was only enhanced in this environment, because now that they were doing something that was so new in terms of everything being virtual, they really did rely upon each other, and they were really sharing best practices and what was working and where their challenges were. So then teachers were really coming together to grow their own instructional practices. And keep in mind, with the COVID-19 project we were doing, they were a lot of times bouncing off each other, and again, being mindful of mental health. If I was a teacher and you were a teacher working on a similar project, we would have the kids do their reflections, but they didn't have to do a reflection for me and for you. We just shared the same reflection. But then what they had you do with that information might be different than what I had them do with that information. So again, being mindful of the well-being of our kids. And those structures, along with the site leadership team meetings, still continued, department chair meetings still continued. So we built that into our days. So we were putting a lot of support into our staff and helping them navigate through this transition while the students were being given projects and working on a lot of that asynchronously or in groups together, virtual, to then come back and get support from their teacher. So in our plan for the fall, which I can talk about at the end, is similar but a little more defined, because obviously in the fall, we're starting with new content and new students in classes. So we have to have a little more defined process in play because of that element.
What were some of the creative ways you used to reach out to students who weren't logging in and were difficult to reach?
So this also goes back to, I think, the relationship we had with our unions. We, in most of our job descriptions, we have that other duties as assigned. And our unions, to their credit, and their relation with us, really gave flexibility that, hey, we need to come together and support our students and our families. And it's okay if we do some things that are outside of our typical class. So for example, each school was asked to develop a system or structure based on the number of students or families who are not connecting. And one of the things that I'm super, super proud of is when you look at the data in terms of the percentage of students that were connecting on a regular week, we were averaging between 85 and 95% engagement. And when I say engagement, that means they were connecting via a synchronous or asynchronous opportunity with their teacher to do the work. Because we recognized too, there was a lot of uncertainty, and kids may have had things go on with their family where they couldn't attend one of the synchronous sessions. So we gave the kids a little bit of flexibility, but it didn't necessarily compromise the level of work that they were doing. But to that point, for that 10 to 15% that weren't connecting, the sites had a plan where they were logging the kids they weren't making connections with. Teachers made a first and second attempt to try to reach out to the families, and when they weren't able to do so, it then went to this site level system where bilingual instructional aides, office staff support, administrators, and counselors had their own processes where they were beginning to do their own outreach to families to try to connect and see what we can do to support. It's no surprise that, and I know Mike talked about equity, that it's not just about giving them a device, but we were passing out devices all the way up until really the second to third last week before we were finishing off, right? So but that's because of our outreach effort, that we were finally making contact with families, because as you know, in our district, we also have about 2,500 students who are McKinney-Vento, who are homeless. So that became a challenge, right? So we had systems in place. I don't know that we were 100% successful, that we got to every kid, but we were constantly reaching out and making these efforts. And again, it's a tribute to our union leadership that we were allowed to use our staff in many creative ways to do that outreach while not compromising our own health.
What would you say some of the challenges and successes were for on live instruction, synchronous instruction? I mean, what did you learn from this first go round?
Well, I can speak to one piece that, in speaking with our site admin and our teachers, our kids love our schools and they love our teachers. I mean, I think that was really clear. They were craving the opportunity to interact with our staff. And I would imagine that's probably consistent across the state, right? That it speaks volumes to just the level of work that our staff does day in and day out. And our kids wanted to connect with them. They wanted to connect with each other. So I think that was just reinforced threefold throughout this process. But I think it goes back to what Mike was saying is, although we have a number of teachers who have been trained in the online standards, that's part of our professional learning plan this spring, this summer, and in the fall to really up our game with that piece, because I think all of us can speak to what we were seeing across the board was more remote, emergent learning or emergency learning. It wasn't true online standard level. Even though we had aspects of it clearly in our district, we really know that that's part of the learning, that we really need to up our game with professional learning for staff so we can ensure high quality in all classes for all kids moving forward. And that is a big equity piece, that when we're doing that, we're helping to break down some of the inequities that our students may face.
Well, I have lots of other questions, but I do want to give plenty of time for you to talk about what's ahead, because I know that's on everyone's mind, and how you're going to take what you've learned from this round to the next round and how it will change either under hybrid possibilities or whatever. Why don't you
Absolutely
talk about what you're doing?
Mike, is there anything you want to say before we transition? Because I knew you were chomping at the bits. Are you good?
I'm good, Jaron. Go
okay.
for it.
I want to make sure. All right. So the fourth takeaway that we talked about is really this virtual school. But I think it's so important that we, again, set some context before we get to that place, because that's going to hopefully make sense to you why this is such an important aspect for us. So again, with us grappling constantly with what is the purpose of K-12 education and how can we now leverage this pandemic to reshape our purpose to better serve and prepare our students. I think it's important to note that we have been thinking about a virtual school for some time. That this wasn't new because of the pandemic. We already have a very strong e-learning program, as Mike mentioned we had Renee Sitlow, who already did a lot of work where we had teachers who've been trained in providing really robust curriculum that was aligned to the 5 C's with our students via a virtual format. And these next few slides that I'm going to talk about, and I'm going to talk about this one in a moment, really will set the context for what we're trying to do. And obviously the COVID-19 will undoubtedly impact our economy. We know it's going to impact future jobs. When Mike spoke about the third dimensional chess, I think that's where this piece is going to be so important moving forward. Now, prior to the COVID-19, we did establish a really robust mentoring and internship program. It's called AIM, our Anaheim Innovative Mentoring Experience. And our AIM program really gives students the opportunity and the ability to apply what they're learning in their classrooms, not just with their content mastery, but with the 5 C's in a work-based setting. And this is huge. Go ahead and move to the next slide. So in our AIM program, we have over 70 business corporate partners and nonprofit partners who are working with our students. It spans over 19 cities and 2 states. I think it's important to note that some of our more notable partners include Disney, Wells Fargo, we have law firms, we have Rolls-Royce, Cal State University Fullerton, Kaiser Permanente, the city of Anaheim, just to name a few. But it spans across multiple industry partners as well. So our kids are getting lots of opportunities across lots of different industries as well. Next slide. It covers over 50 career pathways and 12 different industries that we offer our students. Just to name a few, so you can get a context of what we're doing. When we pursue building these pathways into our schools, and all of our schools have access to this, but the virtual school I'm going to be talking about will also potentially have access to these as well. We build these pathways based on current trends and outlook data on future jobs. So it's really intentional in terms of what we're choosing and selecting for our students, so we know that it will have an impact in their future in terms of what they may choose. To give some examples, we have a really amazing cybersecurity program. We have a biotechnology program, an artificial intelligence pathway, medical academies, law and legal academies. So just to name a few. So these are really strategic pathways that connect to where the jobs are going to be for our kids in the future. Next slide. And all the while, as we talk about these slides, not every student, as we know, is enrolled in a pathway. But that also goes back to why it's so important that all of our students get access to in the teaching of the 5 C's. We know these skills are transferable, and it's so important because students, as you know, may change their mind. They don't know what they're going to do, so they may be in a medical pathway but might decide later on to do something very different. But we're okay because those 5 C's are central to that pathway. I mean, we all joke because even I'm still trying to figure out what I want to do when I grow up, right? So these are all important things that we're thinking about for our kids. And of course, the students that are enrolled in these pathways, they do get more technical knowledge and wisdom around that pathway, and of course, more potential applied experiences as it relates. So this slide right here, no, go back. This slide right here is, I think, also really important. I talked earlier about our Anaheim Union Educational Pledge, and for us as a district, we really do think strategically and intentionally. And when we begin with the end in mind, this slide really speaks to that piece. We see ourselves as an extension of the human resource department of our corporate partners. So we really do try to align with our corporate and higher ed partners as part of their system. So we're not separate. We really do try to articulate and make sure that we are aligned, which right now I think we can all agree most of K-12 is not aligned with the world of work. We're busy preparing kids to get into college, but again, as Mike said, they don't care about AP scores. They don't care about the SAT. Not saying they're not important, but the world of work, that's not their priority. So how do we better align for our students? So we see ourselves as a farm team. We're the farm system. We're the talent scouts. We're the ones looking for that raw talent. And with our partnerships with our local community colleges, in our case, Cypress and Fullerton College, we're able, through our dual enrollment program, to be able to take these dual enrollment courses and be flexible in the way that we teach and the opportunities that we provide our students, so that way we are preparing our kids for what the world of work is asking for. We get feedback from our corporate partners, since we have 70 of them, and we begin to design our dual enrollment courses so they're meeting their needs. So when our kids transition, they are primed for the world of work. How often do we hear from our corporate partners where they have to spend a lot of money hiring a UC grad and then spend money to retrain them because they're not proficient in the 5 C's or customer service? They may have traditional content knowledge, but they don't have all the other skills. That's what we're trying to do for our students.
How will this change in the fall, and how has it changed now when you can't do in-person internships, and even some of the community college courses may change or be online? How will you adapt your program to the present circumstances and when you return?
Right. So our community college partners are also looking at going virtual. So our dual enrollment will be virtual. Again, still with these practices and these images in mind. Our internships with our corporate partners, we actually might be able to do more internships now because it is virtual. And as I'm going to talk about in a moment with the school, they're going to have even greater flexibility because of that virtual environment. So hang tight, I'm gonna answer that question in 1 second, but it gives us even more opportunities for virtual internships now with our students. You can go to the next slide. You know, this is a really powerful picture that Mike often speaks to. You know, so many of our kids, and again, we're in Anaheim, we're in Orange County where there's a lot of wealth, there's a lot of beautiful buildings and a lot of strong corporate partners. Many of our kids drive along the freeway, along the streets, and they see these beautiful, massive buildings in Orange County, but they're always on the outside looking in, right? They're always wondering what's happening, what's taking place there. And because of our AIM program and because of our pledge and the relationships that we form, we now have so many students, and even more potential because of this virtual environment. They're going to now have the access to these buildings and to the people who work within them, right? Where they're now on the inside looking out. And that's powerful when you think about the inequities that many of our students face, because not all of our students' families have connections to people in some of those business worlds, right? So this is really giving our kids access to things they normally don't get access to. So now, going to your question, John, I want you to imagine a school that can provide these internships during the school day. Or let's say because their parents are essential workers and maybe they have younger siblings, maybe they have to stay at home to watch their younger siblings. How can they do that yet still get their education, right? So that's where this flexibility really brought to our forefront when you're factoring also in declining enrollment and the fact that there's no vaccine yet, right? We know that there's not a vaccine for the COVID-19. So we have some families that may not want to send their kids back because the anxiety around, they don't want to bring that virus into the home because maybe they have elders who are a high risk population. So that's where more than ever, we needed to find something within our system that would be an option, a viable option that would provide a rich and meaningful experience for our students. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Perfect. So as we know, most of our students are planning to return in the fall, but there are some that will not because of the factors I just mentioned. So with all those things in mind, the declining enrollment, the fact that families want to stay home, that's where our Cambridge Virtual Academy, our pure virtual school really came to life. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So CVA is a pure virtual school that will serve students in the grades 7 through 12. It was inspired by Oxford Academy, which you know is in our district. It is the #2 ranked school in the state of California and the #1 ranked school in Orange County. And because of the work that I had mentioned and Mike had mentioned previously with our drivers, this transition is, although it is work, the lift was not as heavy because we had so many things already in place. Now, like a traditional campus, the course offerings is still broad and rigorous with different experiences that we'll be able to offer our students based on the needs of the students. All of our experiences, right now we have 3 different experiences, are aligned to the A through G requirements. So they're all providing students at that base the level that they need to be UC or CSU approved, right? So they can still get into those types of institutions. Now, in our highest level experience, the experience 1, this is our most aspirational experience. A student at CVA could not only be A through G aligned, but they could also graduate with 26 transferable credits because of our dual enrollment program. They could also get the seal of biliteracy because we're going to be able to embed world languages into this experience. And by the way, a shout out to our English Learner Multilingual Services Department. We had over 1,000 students this year, despite the fact that we're virtual, get the seal of biliteracy. And it also allows students to become a CTE or Career Technical Education Pathway completer with potential AIM experiences as a result. And again, that's one of our 3 experiences. Based on the needs, they may not get all those things because a family or a student may not choose to do all of those different things. This school offers tremendous flexibility. Again, not just flexibility with the internship and being allowed to work or even do an internship during the day so they can take their schooling maybe in the afternoon or in the evening, but even the flexibility in the way that we teach. If you think about a traditional teacher that has to differentiate their instruction, that can be challenging when you have 38, 40 kids in your class, and on a virtual setting, the way that you manage and give kids assignments and put them in groups, it allows teachers a lot of flexibility to differentiate their instruction. As Mike said, part of the PD that we're doing is around the national online standards. So it embeds these elements so our teachers are primed and prepped and ready to provide these differentiated experiences for our students so they can be successful. Go ahead and go to the next slide. And then like Mike said, our schools already are familiar with the Capstone program. And central to the work we're doing as a district are our 5 Cs. Well, similar to the Capstone, our Cambridge Virtual Academy, or CVA, is going to have what we call a Keystone, which is the comparable aspect, where they're going to be asked regularly to be taught and integrate opportunities to practice and reflect upon their 5 Cs and how their assignments, projects, and activities made them a better collaborator, critical thinker, communicator, etc. It is integrated into the curriculum. It's integrated to the assignments, their projects, their performance task assessments. Because of the training and support we're going to be giving, and we have given our teachers, our students are expected to see these things every day in every class. You know, what the students experienced in the COVID-19 that I mentioned earlier is what will be a regular occurrence at the CVA. But we would also argue these kinds of experiences are going to be similar on our comp or more traditional campus as well. And I know, John, I'll talk in a bit when you ask about the schedule that we're looking at in the fall.
So
we're really excited about where we're headed.
yeah, one of our viewers is giving you a shout out. Says AUHSD has such resilient students! Exclamation point. So many times they just need access, and our district does an amazing job providing these opportunities. So who teaches at the virtual school that you're offering?
So these are all teachers that are from within our district. We're only hiring internally. Our teachers are the ones that are trained. They're the ones that already know our kids and are familiar, like I said, because of our e-learning program. We're hiring from within.
Yeah, so it goes back to the answers are in the room, John, and we are, you know, it's going to be an incubator of great teaching, like an incubator lab for the entire district. These are not full-time teachers, so they have their, you know, they're teaching 4 or 5 classes in their home sites, but maybe 1 or 2 online for the virtual academy. So that way, and they're going to be like in these teacher learning walks, they're going to be the one that other teachers want to go and observe.
So would a student be full-time in this academy?
Yes.
So it wouldn't be you take 1 or 2 courses and you have a choice of that. And are you encouraging, what portion of the student body do you anticipate doing this?
Well, again, there's no testing in, so it's open to all students, including special ed and English learners. I think, you know, for the audience, and especially admins or people that are put in position to make sort of this pivot, I would encourage you to really to think about it, because, you know, that's the final question in terms of what comes next, right? And there's a lot of sort of trepidation from our friends in the unions about, you know, there's just going to be this online Bill Gates sort of driven world, right? And so therefore we need to resist it. I think that's the wrong strategy here. I think that we need to learn and embrace and create our own models and not wait for an outside group to come in and impose a model. That's why we need to have the courage to untap the talent of our own 250,000 teachers in the state of California.
Well, I'm thinking pragmatically, Mike, if you are to open in person and you have large classes, it seems practical that in fact it's a benefit to have students who are doing this virtual school, right, because of the sheer numbers and how you're going to do it. And you can talk a little bit about the difficulties in doing a hybrid and the logistics of it. This certainly is one option too, I would think.
Correct.
Yeah, go ahead and talk about your planning for a hybrid and how it might work. I'm sure everyone's fascinated about that.
Okay, so like Mike said, this is not something we've been just waiting for guidance. We're very proactive, you know, trying to catch that wave early on, where our Chief Academic Officer, Mr. Manuel Colon, has led a task force. Great job facilitating this process, where it includes our different union leadership and the different stakeholders. And we've been looking at different options where either we come back normal, right? Things come back the way they were, or things can remain completely virtual, or we look at some type of blended model. So that way, when the state gives guidance, we can pivot to any one of those models right away and make it happen. So as you can imagine, the big lift was that option B, which is the blended model. What is that going to look like? So through a rigorous process that we went through with our stakeholders, we got to a place where we collectively agreed to this blended model, where right now we're looking at a 33% model. So let me explain. So right now, and we're still working out some of the logistics with our unions and whatnot, but just for the sake of this conversation, Mondays would be a synchronous day. So students and staff would be synchronous. They would be online, where there's a schedule that students would report to with their teachers and get synchronous learning. That would be on Mondays. Then Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday would be the in-person learning, where we would break our kids into 3 cohorts, 33%. Knowing that we're a secondary district, that would allow class sizes to be roughly 16, 17 per class each of those days, where we can properly social distance, and we can effectively manage passing periods and all the things that would come with a school day with only 1/3 of our kids on the campus. That would happen on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, with cohort A on Tuesday, cohort B on Wednesday, cohort C on Thursday. Then Friday becomes an asynchronous day. That could be office hours. thinking about the structures I'd mentioned earlier, that's when PLCs will take place, staff meetings can take place. If we have to continue with professional learning, we can use Fridays as that day to do professional learning with our staff. It also allows some flexibilities with the schools that have unique programs. So as I think about our school, Kennedy, with an IB program, if they have to do some very unique things as a part of the IB, they have that flex day on Friday to potentially do some of that. We feel like this, and honestly, John, I don't know that we're gonna ever find a perfect schedule with the blended, but we felt this kind of schedule gives us the most bang for our buck and allows us to meet the needs of the majority of all of our kids and our staff, given all the uncertainty. So that's what we're developing right now. We're working out a lot of the logistical aspects, but given what we learned in the fall, we feel like we're primed to make that blended schedule a reality or what we learned in the spring, we're primed to make that happen in the fall. But again, we're still hammering out a lot of the logistics, but we have a task force that's looking at all those details.
I know we're almost out of time, John, but I do want to add one thing. There are a lot of questions about the curriculum. There's a lot of off-the-shelf curriculum out there, and if that's what you need, go for it. But again, you have to be serious about unleashing the talent of teachers. And it takes time, but this is something that we're interested in, is creating sort of a shared bank without it being monetized, where teachers can talk to each other and share information and curriculum that's A through G aligned, right? That goes back to the COVID-19 project. I mean, there's a lot of opportunities here to think outside the box, and this is where nimbleness comes in.
So I was just curious. I wrote about today the budget, and there's specific money that the governor's planning for learning loss. About $22 million by our calculation would come to the district, which should be spent by the end of the year. How do you plan to address that?
I think that's a tough question, because this is a traumatic event, and of course we know that the public and the parents are concerned about kids falling behind. This is why we are creating a model that's standards aligned, that's very supportive for teachers. We're doing the teacher learning walks, but we're also going to bring in parent learning walks as well. Parents are real concerned about the quality of education their kids are getting. We want to assure our parents that what to look for, right? And basically holding all of us accountable and we're all in this together. We cannot, as public education leaders, we cannot afford to have parent confidence drop. And that's the big concern, because this is a train wreck, right? With the budget being cut tremendously, and everybody's waiting for the feds to bail us out. This is why we've got to create a system that's going to be accountable, but not a gotcha thing. We've got to unleash the talent that's in the building, and that's what we're trying to do.
Well, with that, we will end it today. I wish we had another hour. And I thank both of you, Mike and Jaron. It's been really interesting to see what your district has been doing. It's been doing interesting things in the past and promises to in the future as well. And I can see you're well on your way. So we'll be posting you will be posting your PowerPoint today, along with the presentation. And again, thank you. And thank you, viewers, for coming. Again, nearly over 1,000 had signed up. Your overwhelming response underscores how important the next few weeks will be. And please follow EdSource's coverage of the reopening of school, the action over the state budget, which is mystifying all of us, and also how the tumultuous events of the past week are affecting the lives, particularly students of color. Thank you for joining. We'll hope to see you again another time.